Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully you're doing well. If we can start with some green check marks, please, and then we'll get into it. We're going to do section 3.3 today, which is the last section in Unit 3. We're kind of cruising along, and it's a really short one. So I just want to talk a little bit about where we're at and where we're going. We have 2 weeks left before March break, so just want to kind of discuss what those next 2 weeks are going to look like, and then we'll continue on. Before I go any further, I just want to say I had a chance to look at your provincial exam marks for math and socials, and you guys did a terrific job. There was, everyone, win, lose, or draw, put their best effort in, and I was really happy with those exam marks, and I hope you guys are proud of them because you guys worked very hard through that, the math especially. So that's really great. I was happy to see all those marks come back. Everyone was about where I expected them. A few of us, I know you guys have some anxiety from time to time when you write tests, and the provincial exam was kind of intimidating. So if your mark went down a little bit, it is what it is, right? You guys worked really hard during the semester, and that exam won't bring your mark down that much. So don't sweat it. Nobody looks at your exam marks other than you. So take pride in what you got on it if you felt comfortable. And, nobody needs to go back and redo the exam, which is kind of a good thing in my book. So Savannah, if you go to the main BCBL page, there's some instructions there that Mrs. Wood put on. It's kind of on the slideshow. So it basically you need your student PEN number, PEN number. It's a provincial education number, and it should be on one of the report cards we've sent home recently. Or if you have an old report card, it'll be on there as well. Basically, you enter your PEN and your exam scores come up. And if you can't figure it out, Savannah, we have your scores in our office, so you can just send a message and we can tell you what your grades were. One other issue that came up, I'm not sure why it happened the way it did. We didn't really look into it too deeply, but for the math scores, it said no school percentage available or something like that. So basically, when I entered my marks, for whatever reason, they didn't get sent off to the ministry. So it's not like, oh no, I don't have a school mark, I didn't pass the course. No, we sent them off on Monday morning once we realized that they weren't in there. So they'll be in there. If you check back in the next couple of weeks, your school percentage and your final grade will all be there. I mean, you can calculate it if you want. You know what your school percentage was, so multiply that by 0.8 and then add to it your exam score times 0.2. Because 20% for your exam, 80% for your in-class, and just add them together, and that'll give you your final grade. But if you have issues with it, let me know. I can figure it out. I don't know that anybody's super concerned about it right now, but there you go. Interms we're going to send out tomorrow, so I'm going to spend today kind of marking anything that's been submitted, and then we'll fire off those interms tomorrow. And then I know a few of you are still submitting stuff, and that's fine. I mean, as long as we're cruising along, that's good. It's when you just stop submitting stuff or you don't have anything to submit that I get kind of worried, and that's not a good thing. So, all right, maybe I'll come back to this in a second. I just want to talk about the course. Where we're kind of at is we've done the first unit. I just ignore the safety unit. I don't really count that as the first unit. So we've done the first unit, Unit 1. We've done the second unit. Most of you have submitted that second unit. If you haven't, get on it. And now we're going to finish up Unit 3 today. A very short lesson today. You guys will have some time to work. And then that's kind of it for biology. So the biology unit is comprised of, I guess it's not a unit, it's called a module in the course. So the biology module, the biology part of the course is the first 3 units, 1, 2, and 3. So now that we're done that, there is kind of I guess we'll call it a test on the first 3 units all together. So all of the biology stuff at once. And it's the exact same as all the tests you've done so far. It's just a little bit longer. And I noticed for the units 1, 2, and 3 test, most of you guys are finishing those tests in like 15 minutes or less. So I don't know if we'll call it a test for the units. They're more of like quizzes, but anyways. So what I'm going to get you guys to do is today we're going to finish up Unit 3, and that ends the biology unit. So we're done biology now. And there in the course, there's I'll just scroll down a little bit here. It's called the Module 1 exam. There's a little review. It's not great. And then there is a test. So just like the ones you've been doing, just a few extra questions. And again, I'd just like you guys to go through that and do your best on it. So once you've done Unit 1, 2, and 3 test, I'll send you the password for the Module 1 sort of test. Now, there are 3 more sort of modules which we need to do. There's a chemistry one, which is pretty big, a physics one, which isn't huge, and then there's kind of a small little chunk of earth science. And basically, we have 2 weeks left before the spring break. So I'm going to go from Unit 3. We're going to jump down to Unit 10 because we can fit in the earth science before the March break. So instead of starting chemistry and then breaking it up with a 2-week break in the middle, we're going to start earth science, and we'll be able to finish it before the break. So it's not a long unit. There's only 2 sections, which I'm going to break into 3 sections just because it's a little bit easier that way. And then you should be done that. So I guess for me as a teacher, I want you guys to be done this biology stuff before March break. So if you find yourself a little bit behind, today is the last day of Unit 3. So you should be before March break, so you have another kind of like a buffer of a week and a half to finish up all of biology. If you are still doing the biology unit after March break, you just won't make it through the course in time. So that's kind of a hard deadline. I know I don't really set a lot of hard deadlines, but that's a hard deadline. I won't be looking at any biology stuff after March break. So if you want marks for biology, get it done before whatever. I think it's March 11th, I think is the Friday. So that's kind of what I want to do. In a perfect world, we'll get through the Unit 10 stuff before March break as well. And if you're staying current with the material, you shouldn't have any issues getting that done. So the people that are a bit behind that I'm kind of concerned about at this point. So that's kind of where we're at. We're going to finish up Unit 3 today, write the test whenever you get a chance, quiz, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to start into Unit 10 tomorrow, which gives us, or the next time we meet, I believe is on Thursday. And then we have 2 double blocks next week. So that'll be plenty of time to finish off Chapter 10, Unit 10 stuff. And that'll take us into March break. It's a nice natural break. It'll be a nice natural break within the course. So that's kind of that. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? I know it's a lot to take in. I'm going to just jump into 3.3 here. If you do have any questions or anything from the learning guide that comes up, just fire away. And Anna, it's really hard for me to see the V or the A. We'll have today's class, we'll have class on Thursday, and I'm pretty sure we have 2 classes next week. So I guess 4 classes technically before the March break. But that's because we have class every other day. You do have 2 weeks before March break. So Unit 3, I'd love it to be done sooner than that. You should have it done probably before next class, but if you want to get Unit 3 done finished on Friday, that would be perfect. I can work with that. And then the Unit 10 stuff will be due the following Friday. And that's kind of it. Taylor, I'm pretty sure March break goes from the Friday the 11th would be the last day. You guys don't have class on Friday. And then it goes for 2 weeks because you have the Easter holidays on the end. So looking here, I have my calendar. Mr. Ross just passed me. Friday, March 11th is kind of the start for you, 12th through to the 28th. And then class will begin on the 29th of March. So that's kind of the sort of timeline. Sorry, Abby, the module exam, it's hidden in the course still. I haven't opened it up. So it's kind of like a little bit of a longer test. So don't sweat it too much. You guys have been doing really well on the small tests so far, or the quizzes. So yeah, that's great. Okay, so today this is the last section for Unit 3. It's how introduced species affect ecosystems. So if you recall, last day we talked about some natural occurring things that affect ecosystems. We talked about like floods and mining and resource use and stuff like that. And today we're going to talk about sort of the human repercussions and how we can influence animals and plants and natural ecosystems with by introducing plants or animals that wouldn't normally be there. So we're going to look at some things with respect to that. So native species is pretty much what it sounds like. It's something that really should be there. And if, without human intervention, these would be the plants and animals that would live in an ecosystem. So, like starting a few hundred years ago when people started coming across the Atlantic on boats from Europe, people brought with them things that they were used to having in their homes. Like, I can't even think of specific examples, but I mean, if you lived in Europe and you're used to farming potatoes, well, the settlers brought potatoes with them because they could grow them here in North America and eat them. And so things like that. So people started bringing plants with them. People started bringing animals with them across the Atlantic. And that's kind of how this sort of native species and introduced species thing began. So when I'm talking about introduced species, they can be called foreign species, alien species, non-native species, exotic species. These are all different words for the exact same thing. They're just animals or plants that don't naturally live there. It's kind of what they are. Sometimes they can be harmless. Sometimes they can be a benefit. And sometimes they can be a detriment. They can really harm the environment. So we're going to look at some examples of all of those cases. The pictures here, there's two of them. There's this European leaf-feeding beetle was brought over to North America. You can see this little guy here to combat this stuff here. So this purple loosestrife is a plant that was brought over from Europe, and people probably thought it looked really pretty. So they brought it with them and planted it and said, "Oh, look at how pretty my garden is. I have all this beautiful purple flowers." And that was, nobody knew any better. Now this plant, this purple flowering plant, is just taken over ecosystems. It has no sort of natural predators, nothing that eats it. So somebody along the way is like, well, why don't we bring over the beetle that eats that purple loosestrife, and we'll release the beetle here, and maybe the beetle will eat it all, and then the beetle will just die. Rarely does it ever happen that way, but along comes this beetle, another introduced species lives here now, and the beetle eats it, but it's not eating it quite fast enough to make it go extinct within our ecosystem. So these are just kind of examples of things that you'll see. Invasive species take advantage of their new habitat. So invasive species is alien species, non-native species, introduced species. Again, all the same thing. We're just calling them invasive now. And invasive has this connotation about it where you end up with it having a huge impact on the environment. So the keys here, what makes an invasive species is they have no predators, no natural predators. So when they enter an environment, there's nothing that eats them. So there's nothing to keep the population in check. They can just grow and breed, and nothing eats them. So the only reason they die is if there was a lack of food, or if sort of the environmental factors killed them off. They tend to be really aggressive competitors. So they will outcompete other species for the resources like food and shelter and habitat and stuff like that. And typically they have very fast reproductive cycles. So they can reproduce really, really quickly. And those are kind of the big three reasons why an introduced species will become invasive, why it'll take over the habitat. And Abby, you bring up a really good point of disease. North Americans brought disease with them, and the First Nations people that lived in North America had no immunity to that disease. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. When we talk about parasites and things like that being brought over, the native species that live in these ecosystems have no natural way to defend themselves against these new species that were brought over. Remember these sort of really complex interactions that happen between plants and animals. We talked about symbiotic relationships between plants and plants and plants and animals. They've existed, they've been developed over thousands of years. Now you bring in a new species, there's not that really long time frame for those interactions to be developed. It's just immediate. So there you go. European starling is a type of bird that was brought over. People thought they were beautiful, so they brought them over as kind of like birds to keep in a cage. And then somebody's like, well, I'll just let this one go. And maybe it was a pregnant female, laid some eggs, and boom, no natural predators for the European starling, and they just take over. And away you go. I have two little videos here of my favorite invasive species. Not that I am advocating for invasive species, but it's kind of funny, but it's kind of scary at the same time. So we'll watch both these videos. Has anyone ever seen the Asian carp issue before? Ever talked about Asian carp at all? Sometimes, every once in a while, there's somebody that's maybe seen it before. If you haven't, you might have seen it, you just not have known it. Kind of like flying fish. Yeah, Taylor, you got it. We'll watch the video and we'll see if maybe you've seen them before or not. I think the first one's kind of like educational, has some information in it, and then the second one is just really funny. So, full screen this.
This is what happens when a particular population of fish in the Illinois River is startled.
Yeah, right around back, behind the boat. Wow. Watch out. They're everywhere.
These are silver carp, the most notorious of the Asian carp family. Many believe the Illinois River has the densest population of silver carp in the nation.
That's kind of ground zero on this invasion.
Asian carp were introduced to the United States in the 1970s to control algae in catfish farms in the South. In the 1980s, floodwaters allowed the carp to escape and infest the Mississippi River basin.
When it comes to the river systems, if it's connected, if it's got a direct connection to the Mississippi or the Illinois River, it's going to have these fish in it.
Asian carp not only disrupt the food chain, push out native fish, are a nuisance to boaters, but they are also extremely dangerous.
Yeah, this is about an average size silver carp. This is the one that can hurt you when it jumps. Your boat's going 20, 30 miles an hour and this guy hits you, it's going to leave a mark.
It was a flying silver carp that broke this woman's jaw as she participated in a sport created for the sole purpose of hunting this nuisance fish. Their population is growing at a rapid pace. The females can lay 2 million eggs a year, and they grow rapidly.
Once they get to a certain size, we don't have a predator that's capable of eating them, and they're just running unchecked.
So how do we get rid of them? Some say if you can't beat them, eat them. They believe that creating an appetite for silver carp will hold their population in check.
The vision about all this is to literally educate all people how to eat this fish.
But getting Americans to eat silver carp has been challenging.
People in this country just don't seem to want to pick around the bones. The biggest problem with these fish are that the fillets are filled with bones.
Now there is concern that Asian carp have a path out of the rivers and into the Great Lakes through the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. So a multi-million-dollar electronic barrier has been constructed to potentially stop the migration.
With the barriers in place, we are effectively plugging the biggest hole for the movement of these fish. It would be very difficult for fish to just swim right through this waterway behind us.
But not everyone is convinced, so cleaning, training, and drying boats every time they come out of the water can prevent the tiny microscopic creatures who lurk there from ending up in lakes and rivers where they shouldn't call home. It's the best defense we have against the ever-growing world of the silent invaders.
All right, so Asian carp or silver carp, They're an invasive species, and the reason I kind of bring it up, because it's funny and you see them flying around, but you see those people, they're shooting their bows, and the bow has like a fishing line attached to it, and then they, hit the fish in the air and then reel it in. It's just this like crazy thing that's happening in the States right now. So they're in the Mississippi River, which runs all the way from basically the Gulf of Mexico all the way through the middle of the United States and through a bunch of canals and things up in the northern part. Right next to Chicago, there's a path from the river through a bunch of locks and things like that into the Great Lakes. So if these fish entered the Great Lakes, it would be like a multi-million-dollar fishing industry that exists in the Great Lakes would be basically wiped out. There's no natural predators there, and you end up with them just taking over. So it is pretty serious, although it's kind of funny. You know what? You can't really just kill them all. You can't get rid of them all. They've tried poisoning the canal to kill all these fish in it, like a really fish-specific poison, and they only got a few carp and a lot of other fish. So, I mean, is it worth it to poison the water to kill everything to get rid of these fish? There's no specific way to just target carp. There's lots of natural fish that exist in these waterways as well. So it's just kind of one of these things. When you see the video, the fish jump out of the water, when they're just naturally disturbed, they'll jump out. But what they found was, you can kind of see it here in this little thumbnail next to me. There's this boat, and on the front, there's these big circles, and they had these things hanging into the water. They put electricity in the water, just a small voltage, and because of how the carp are built, they sense the voltage and get all excited and jump. This second video was the first one I'd ever seen about the Asian carp, and I think the person's laugh in the video really makes it the best video for watching Asian carp. But these people are in a waterway, and they don't have the fancy electric things to excite the carp. They're just driving through the waterway. So let's just take a little watch of this one because it's kind of funny.
Oh, yeah, look. Oh, my God. Oh, shit. That was insane. Look at all of them. They're still doing it. Oh my God. We gotta do that again. Can you see him or something?
All right, it goes on for a while like that, but you can imagine you're on a boat cruising down a river, lake, wherever they exist, and all of a sudden they start jumping out. And I've spent a lot of time on boats. Boats can travel pretty quickly, and all of a sudden you have these 20, 30-pound fish flying through the air. And the first video we watched there, obviously that girl got hit in the face. It broke her jaw. And this is like a real issue, right? Not only do these carp pose a danger to boaters, but they also they've basically wiped out the habitat for natural fish, and that's kind of the big issue here. So kind of a lighthearted way to look at an invasive species. It is hilarious, but still the natural fish populations have just been basically wiped out because these carp have no predators. There's nothing that eats them. They reproduce quickly. Like the video said, 2 million eggs a year. Not all of them survive, but that's a lot of offspring. So no competitors, they reproduce fast, and they're very aggressive in the food they eat, right? So they wipe out. The reason they were brought to North America was people had ponds and they wanted to eat all the algae in the ponds. So they put them in the ponds. The carp eat all the algae because they are really good at eating algae on the bottom. And then a flood happened where the water level of the river rose, and now all of a sudden the fish could exit the pond and go into the river system. And that's how we end up with this sort of problem. So there's literally thousands of videos of these things online. Some of them are pretty funny, like fish jumping into boats and stuff and people freaking out. So if you're bored later, you can watch. Let's talk about something a little closer to home. So if an invasive species is a predator, it may not have a huge advantage. If it's higher on the food chain, it may have a huge advantage because the native species don't have any way to protect themselves. So this is an example. A bullfrog may not seem like a sort of top-level carnivore, but it is. It eats all sorts of plants and animals within an ecosystem. So it's American bullfrog. It was imported to British Columbia to provide frog legs for restaurants, and obviously for one way or another it got into sort of the native habitat and it's taken off. And you'll notice that Lower Mainland has some issues with it and the east coast of Vancouver Island here, but down in southern Okanagan, in the Soyuz area, they live there at a specific time, but now we've through sort of efforts to mitigate their impact and try to get rid of them and take them out of the ecosystem, they haven't been seen for 2 years, which is kind of a good thing. So once they kind of take hold in an area, then you end up with a huge problem. Some things in chat, I love it. Can we just put millions of alligators in there? You know what? For the longest time, this is how we dealt with invasive species. And there's countless examples of it out there where somebody's like, well, we have a huge problem with frogs. Okay, frogs have no natural predators. Nothing eats frogs within this habitat. So let's introduce something that eats these frogs. So you introduce this thing, and then all the frogs get eaten, and then the thing still is there. You're like, well, what's next? So instead of eating the American bullfrog, maybe there's some native tree frog that it starts to eat, or maybe the alligator starts to eat fish in the pond, or whatever you want. So it's kind of humorous now that we can look back at all these examples throughout history where you've had introduced species that's been brought into an area, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, this is a problem. And then you introduce another species to kill the first species, and then the next species becomes a problem. And you just get into this kind of vicious cycle where you keep on introducing predators until you just kind of lose control. So, it's interesting to see. You can look it up online. There's lots of examples, particular in Australia. There's a few great examples of this, and lots of other places. So as you guys have been looking at in social studies, you've talked a little bit about diseases brought over by Europeans and parasites and things like that the native First Nations people didn't have any means of immunity against. The same goes in nature. In the environment, you end up with invasive species that come in, and then you have sort of these huge population booms of them. And some of them are parasitic, some of them bring disease and things like that. So on the far, my left here, your right, it's kind of backwards. This is called a lamprey. And these guys are an invasive species. I don't know where they came from, but now they live in the Great Lakes. They're huge, and they have these kind of vicious looking mouths with all these teeth. Obviously this is a person's hand holding this thing. So, they're like 10, 15 centimeters long, or 20, like huge. And they latch onto like salmon and lake trout and things like that live in the Great Lakes, and they basically are a parasite. They'll just kill the fish and then move on to the next fish. So this is an introduced species that's an issue. The other two pictures behind me here, these are both of zebra mussels. So this is like a water intake pipe, and the zebra mussels have completely filled the inside of it and plugged it up. So we can talk about these invasive species causing harm to an ecosystem, but now the zebra mussels can actually cause harm to infrastructure. If you think about Kelowna specifically, this is a huge issue right now in British Columbia because we don't have zebra mussels yet. They're a really big problem in the Great Lakes right now. And I'm not sure if they exist in Alberta yet, but they're kind of working their way across Canada. And we don't have them in the Okanagan yet, but we have lots of tourists who come here in the summer. They bring their boats, they launch their boats. So if a zebra mussel is on a boat from, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, and then you put it in Okanagan Lake and one of them falls off and now it starts to breed and it'll take over the lake. So there's a huge ad campaign out right now to stop the spread of zebra mussels. You pull your boat out of the water, you're supposed to dry it off. They're having like border point checks where if you're trying to bring a boat across from province to province or from the United States up, there's people at the borders that'll inspect the boat to make sure there's no zebra mussels on it anywhere. The third picture here is these zebra mussels growing on a boat. And these zebra mussels will actually sink boats. They become so heavy that the boat gets lower and lower and lower until the boat just goes underwater and a couple waves crash over it, and then you don't have a boat anymore. It's just sitting at the bottom of a lake. So there's huge implications for the environment because these zebra mussels will outcompete. They grow on everything. No sort of natural plants or animals can grow on the bottom of the lakes or on the pipes or anything like that. Algae, all the primary producers of the ecosystem have nowhere to grow. So they'll do that. They have implications for water pipes and intake. So we take our water out of the lake. If you're in Kelowna or some of Glenmore gets water from the lake, it'll fill up those pipes and you'll have to keep putting new pipes down every couple of years because they'll get filled up. And then personal property, like your boats, will actually sink. So they aren't here yet, Alex. That's kind of why I bring it up. There's a huge issue with them coming closer. And Taylor brings up another point. I should probably bring Chad up here. Their shells, once the zebra mussels die, the shells will wash up on shore, and they're razor sharp. And if you step on them, they'll cut your feet. So now our beaches, you think about Kelowna as tourism, right? All of a sudden our lakes are full of these things. The beaches aren't walkable anymore. It's just a huge, huge issue, an invasive species that will come in and just wipe out an ecosystem. So that's something that's kind of in the news a little bit right now. So I'm going to pose this question, maybe in chat you could throw up an answer. How do invasive species get to Canada? We've talked a little bit about settlers bringing them over from Europe a couple hundred years ago, but the world is much more complex now. So how do invasive species make it into Canada, North America? So people bring them here as a good one. Specifically, what does that look like though, Alex? Why would a person bring an invasive species to Canada? So I guess I should have asked, how do they get here, and maybe the why of the how. Why somebody would bring an invasive species or an alien species to Canada. So we have people do it by accident. That's a big one for sure. Airplanes, cruise ships, they're bad people. I would say sometimes people have sort of bad intentions, not to release them into the environment, but maybe to smuggle an invasive species in. But I don't know if that's how it all the time. Boats and planes. It was really cool. There's a guy who lives in Kelowna. He went to Rutland Senior. His kids are in high school in Kelowna at Rutland Senior. And he works for a company, a nonprofit organization called Island Conservation. And he talks about up in northern British Columbia, Alaska, there's a bunch of really protected islands where boats have come ashore, like crashed, and rats have been released onto these islands and just taken over these islands and killed all the native bird species because they eat the eggs of these native birds. And now these islands are just have no life forms on them at all except for these rats who just eat everything there. And he's saying that some now boats that travel in these areas that are really sensitive have to have a rat spill kit on board. So if a boat were to crash onto one of these islands, they have to have a means of sort of dealing with the rats and things that are going to come off the ships, because big boats are going to have these problems, things like that. So seaweed, we don't call it, well, I guess you can call it seaweed, but it's Eurasian milfoil is its kind of common name. It was introduced to Okanagan Lake by accident, and it's in most of the lakes in North America, but it's from Asia, so that's a big one. Wouldn't the rats starve after a while? They would. The population would dwindle, but it would never go away. There'd always be like grass. We're talking sort of big islands, not really small islands. So mostly humans. People traveling is a big one. The big one for oceans and boats in general is a ship's ballast. So if you have a huge shipping container ship, they're absolutely massive, like thousands of feet long. Basically, when they don't have any cargo on them, they need to bring in a bunch of water. So as the ship loses its cargo, it has to bring in water, and it's called ballast, so it makes the ship more stable. And with it, they're bringing millions of gallons of water, millions of liters, I should say, and to hold the ship stable. And then, that gets emptied, and then it travels somewhere else, and then all of a sudden it gets full of cargo again, and then it dumps the ballast overboard. And this is kind of how zebra mussels made it to the Great Lakes, and these lampreys that we looked at, those big things that suck on the sides of fish, because of ship ballast. It's really common on big international waters. Things from Europe get brought to North America, ballast gets emptied, invasive species get delivered. Sometimes they'll just die, but sometimes if they fit into a niche, they can take off. So ship ballast is a big one. People bring over pets, and my little beautiful snake that I bought, I smuggled into Canada. It's now an anaconda, and it's 10 feet long, and I don't have anywhere to put it. What do? Well, I just release it into the wild. And this is actually happening in Florida, where anacondas from like the Amazon rainforest are living in the Florida Everglades because their habitat's really great. No natural predators that eat these big things. There's tons of food for them. They can outcompete native species of snakes and other animals. And there you go. I don't have a snake. It was just an example, but yeah. There you go. So rats in Kelowna. Most rats came from Europe, but they, again, have taken over. And there you go. So here's some introduced species in BC. The four here, the American bullfrog, European starling, Eurasian milfoil is one we talked about. That's a huge problem at Okanagan Lake. They kind of harvest it off the bottom each year to kind of make swimmers not go through it because everyone thinks it's so gross. And then the Norway rat. So these are all kind of invasive species that have been introduced to BC. So these are all ones that kind of harm the habitat. This guy here, this is a ringneck pheasant. Now, ringneck pheasants were introduced to British Columbia from Europe. They're native to Europe. And people brought them over because they like to hunt them. It's a good game bird. Now, the reason I bring up the ringneck pheasant is because pheasants don't harm the ecosystems like the rest of them. They fit in naturally. There's natural predators that eat them. So, yeah, if you're lucky, you'll see them around Kelowna. I've seen a few. There's some on like Swamp Road, and then out Reed's Corner, like Sexsmith Road. I've seen them out there as well. So this is an invasive species or a non-native species that lives here, but it fits into the ecosystem well. There's natural predators to eat it. It's not a huge competitor, so it'll find its own little habitat and raise its family and whatever. But the numbers don't just explode like the Asian carp or the zebra mussel or the bullfrog or the starling. So it's an invasive species. It's not native to this area. It's been introduced, but there's natural predators to control it. So it's kind of one of these things. Is it a big deal to bring it over? Well, it might be because it's not naturally found here, but it's kind of fit into the environment really well. It provides food for the natural animals, like kind of fits in like a grouse or something that is native. So not all native species or introduced species, non-native species I should say, take over the habitat. Some fit in nicely. Most will just die immediately, but it's the ones that don't die immediately that become the problem. This guy down at the bottom is a perch. They do exist, or a bass, sorry. They do exist down in the South Okanagan naturally. The reason I bring this one up is I have a little pond behind my house. It's probably about a hectare in size, not huge. So my little guy is 3. We go there and you kind of stand on the banks. You can see these perch and bass swimming around in this pond. So somebody is introduced into this little pond by my house, perch and bass, because they're fun to fish for. So me and my little guy, we go fishing there all the time and catch these. they're not native to the Okanagan or the North Okanagan. Somebody's brought them here and just to fish for them. So this is another example. Do I hate the fact that they're in that pond? Not really. It's kind of fun to fish for them. I mean, they probably wouldn't naturally be there. There's no other fish in this pond before. So is it a bad thing? I don't know. Who am I to judge that? They have no way of getting out of the pond. It's not like the pond's going to flood and they'll swim into the Okanagan Lake. But now they are in Okanagan Lake because people have introduced them and things like that. So it's an issue. Do I eat them? No, I don't eat them. I'm kind of a catch and release fisherman. Everything I catch, I just put back. And then you can see example, we've talked a lot about animals, but this is an example of a plant. So these would be all natural trees, and there's this kind of ground cover that just grows over everything, and it outcompetes all of these natural trees for sunlight, and then it just basically crawls over everything and just kills all the naturally occurring stuff underneath. And this is common down in the Lower Mainland. You'll see lots of these kind of vines and things like that. Alex, have you ever been fishing before? I mean, fish you go fishing, you catch a fish, you put it back, it's still alive. I don't know. It's pretty common, catch and release. It seems a little bit more humane than killing them. The last example, I don't love this example, but it's in the textbook and it sometimes comes up on exams and things like that. It's GOERT, Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. Now, this is an organization down in the Lower Mainland, and basically there's a type of oak tree that used to exist in the Lower Mainland, and then over the years, things like the purple loosestrife that we talked about at the beginning of the block have outcompeted this type of tree from living in these habitats, but the oak tree is native. So all this purple loosestrife grows really quickly, takes up all the sunlight, and then the oak trees can't grow because there's no sunlight that makes it down to the ground anymore. So this is a big sort of push in BC right now. And the reason I guess is kind of important is this Garry Oak tree, as climate change is happening, as the province of British Columbia gets warmer and all the pine trees are dying because of pine beetle, this Garry Oak is better suited to the sort of new climate of British Columbia, the warmer climate, than the pine trees and the Douglas fir and things like that live here. So this is kind of one of these examples where an invasive species has taken over a habitat. People have gone in and taken out the invasive species and planted these oak trees to try to grow these oak forests back to how they used to be. And this is just an example of an initiative in British Columbia where we've addressed this native invasive species that's taken over Scotch broom, English ivy that we just looked at there. And they take all of the invasive species out of a habitat and they grow the natural trees until it becomes sort of self-sustaining. So that's Garry Oak, Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. Now that's it for this lesson. I promised you guys it would be short, and it was. So where are we at? We are finished units 1, 2, and 3. Remember, units 2 and 3 had an assignment to go along with them. So Unit 2 had the biography of a nutrient, which most of you have submitted along with your learning guide for Unit 2, which is great. I'm going to mark it in a separate spot, and you'll be able to see that mark soon. I haven't gone through those yet. I want to get a bunch of them so I can just read them all at once instead of doing one at a time. Just a little bit more efficient for me that way. We're now done Unit 3, and Unit 3 had the adapted squirrel assignment with it. So you were to put a squirrel in a biome that it wouldn't normally live, talk about the adaptations that it had, draw a picture or Photoshop something together, hand draw it, I don't care. So that was the Unit 3 assignment. So those were kind of the last few classes, what we've been doing. So theoretically, you should be done your Unit 3 learning guide now, all of the notes. You can answer the questions on section 3.3 now. Get that out of the way. I would love it if you could get your adapted squirrel project and your Unit 3 done for Friday. Gives you lots of time. Today's Tuesday. We're going to start Unit 10 on Thursday, and we'll have Unit 10 wrapped up before March break. But you must, hard deadline, must finish off units 1, 2, and 3 before March break. I will not look at them after March break. If you haven't done units 1, 2, and 3 before March break, you just aren't going to make it through the course in time. And I can't stress that enough. Once we get through biology and once we get through the earth science, it leaves us with, sorry, trying to read Taylor's question at the same time. It leaves us with chemistry and physics, which are two really big units, kind of the meat and potatoes of Science 10. They're the big parts of it. So you don't want to be fighting biology and earth science after the break. You want to get it out of the way, because once we get into chemistry, things get a little bit more heavy. There's more sort of foundational building of knowledge, kind of like math, and you don't want to be doing biology and physics and chemistry at the same time. It just won't work. So get Unit 3 done, write that module exam once you've done the first 3 tests, then we'll get on to Unit 10 later this week, and we'll get it done before the break. So yes, Unit 10's open, ready to print. It's down at the very bottom. We're going to slow down for chemistry and physics. We'll have more time. We'll spend more time talking about it. Biology and earth science are kind of based in vocabulary. So you learn what a consumer is, and then it's tested. With the chemistry, it'll be more sort of process oriented, where I'll give you 2 chemicals. You'll have to know how to combine them together. You have to use your data booklet. There'll be more process, kind of more of a math sort of feel to the chemistry unit after the March break. So it'll be, the chemistry is broken down into, I think, 3 or 4 units. It's a little bit longer. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm going to leave it there. If you guys have any questions on Unit 3 Learning Guide, I'll answer them at the beginning of class next day. But other than that, I think you guys should be doing okay. This biology stuff's really straightforward. Just involves a bit of reading if you're not watching the videos, and if you might have to go back and review a bit. But you guys seem to have a good handle on it. So thanks, guys. You have 30 minutes of free time right now before your next class, and you should definitely consider doing some. Actually, I'm going to check the schedule here. You should definitely consider finishing off Unit 3 right now, or finishing off Unit 2. What's today? Today is the 1st. It doesn't look like there's anything going on this afternoon. So no, I'm not going to say there's no class after this. You need to go check for yourself. But the schedule I'm looking at just has science today, and that's it. So I don't know if there's socials or not. Thank you, Taylor. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide. Last time I told you there wasn't class, and there was. I got in trouble. So I'm not going to get in trouble again. I don't want to get in trouble. Mrs. Wood, she just lets me have it. So there you go. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on Thursday. Finish off Unit 3, and have a good afternoon.